One of the questions I get asked on a reasonably regular basis is how to add extra drama to my photographs. And the way I personally achieve this is by dodging and burning my image, which is something I'll generally do in Camera Raw. But let's suppose that you already have an image open that you've been working on, and it would make it impractical to take that file back to its raw state. So you've got an image that you've already done some, let's say, cloning or healing on, and you wish to add a little bit more drama actually in Photoshop. Now, the best way to do this is, of course, non-destructively. And my preferred method is to paint my lightening and darkening effects on a separate layer. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to first of all take my image to the full screen view mode. At the moment it's a floating tab, and so I press F to take it to the full screen mode, and then I press down on the space bar to temporarily activate the hand tool so that I can reposition the image into the center of my screen. Then, heading over to my Layers panel, if you notice if I come down to the very bottom of the Layer panel, there is a Create New Layer icon. Now, what I'll generally do, instead of just clicking on this, is I will hold down my Option or Alt key and then click, and it's now offering me the option to name this layer, which I'll do. I'll call it Dodge and Burn. And it's also asking me what sort of mode blending-wise I would like to use. Well, if you've not used blending modes before, just be aware that essentially what this does, if I change the blending mode to overlay, which is the mode I'm going to use in this instance, it's to do with the way this layer reacts with the pixels in the layer below. Now, in an overlay blend mode, what I do want to do is I wish to fill this layer with an overlay neutral color of 50% gray. So click yes to accept that, click OK. Now, if I come back to my Layers panel, you'll see that I now have my Dodge Burn layer created, sitting above my background layer. Now, the reason this is useful is that if I now paint onto my Dodge and Burn layer, I'm not actually affecting any of the pixels in the original image. This is called non-destructive editing. And the reason this is useful is because if I then come to print my image, I'm not going to see any JPEG artifacting or any posterization on the photograph because I haven't actually damaged any of the pixels. Also, by having it on its own separate layer, it gives me a great deal of flexibility. So the next thing is to select my brush. I can come over to my Tools panel and select my brush tool, or just use the keyboard shortcut of B. Now, having selected my brush, if you come down to the color picker, you can see that I have white as my foreground color and black as my background color. If you wish to change these two colors, change the orientation, you can click on this little two-headed arrow. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's just there, so you can switch the foreground and background color. But you might also notice in the tip there that there is the keyboard shortcut, which is the way I prefer to work. I just press X to change the foreground and background color. Now, if I wish to paint in the middle of the rock, this image I have to add, actually, I captured in the Grampians National Park in central Victoria. And I took this with the 5D Mark II with a 17mm tilt shift lens, which is a very beloved lens of mine. And what I'm looking to do in this image is I'm looking to lighten the shadow area in the center of the rock and darken the sky. So with my brush now selected, I now need to change the size of my brush. And I can do that very, very easily by right-clicking, and that brings up the contextual menu. And I can change the size by just changing the little slider bar. The issue with doing it this way is that I can't personally visualize what a 191 pixel brush will look like, and it will depend on my zoom ratio and the resolution of the image as well. So I find the easier way to change the size and the hardness is again through keyboard shortcuts. So let me just come out of that, and my preferred method for changing the size of the brush is just to locate the two square bracket keys. Now they sit next to the P key on your keyboard. If you press the right square bracket, you'll make your brush bigger. If you press the left square bracket, you will of course make the brush smaller. If I hold down the Shift key, I'll make my brush, if I press the right square bracket, harder. If I hold down the Shift key and press the left square bracket, I'm making the brush softer. Now in this instance, we do want a soft brush, and we want an opacity for this brush. Instead of, say, 100%, which is going to lay down way too much lightening on my image, I want an opacity of around about 30%. So I'm just bringing that back to 30%. If you take it to, let's say I've got it at 61% at the moment, if you wish to just jump straight to a certain opacity of 30%, if you just press down 3 on the numerical keyboard, that will take you, I need to enter first. If you press down 3 on the numerical keyboard, that will take you straight to 30%. 3.4 will take you to 34%, 5.5 to 55%, and so on. But for the moment, I'm just looking at about 30%. Now I start painting on my shadow area, and you see that immediately I'm beginning to lighten the shadows within that rock surface. That's done a reasonably good job there. I'll make the brush a little bit smaller and just paint on this other rock surface over here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit now so that I can just paint these two top areas, but I want to do these at around a 10% opacity because I don't want them to be quite as light. They were a little bit more shaded, so I'll just even those up a little bit there. Now zooming back out so that I can reposition the image with a spacebar and just address the sky, I now need to change from white to black, so I press my X key to change to a black brush, make my brush bigger, and let's go with 30% for the sky as well. So I'll just paint over where I wish to darken the sky down, and we'll just make that a little bit darker over the side here. That's it. And yeah, that's looking better. I might just do, say, 10% on these rocks to darken them down a little bit, add a little bit of extra drama there. And let's say 10% again, but I'm going to switch the orientation of the brush back to white, and I'm just going to paint a little bit into these shadows here. So that's it. That's having now lightened and darkened the sort of areas of the image that I'm looking to change. If I come over to my layers panel, if you look at the dodge burn layer, if I click on the little eye icon that sits next to the dodge burn layer, as it says, it indicates the layer visibility. Clicking that on and off just gives me an idea of how far I've come with this image, just with a few simple paint strokes. Now again, it is very flexible because it is on its own separate layer. If I feel I've overdone it, I can always just fade back the opacity of that layer and back down to, say, 50%. You get obviously a lesser version of the dodge burn layer, 50% version in fact, of course, but it just gives you the ultimate flexibility. I would now then save this file off as a PSD, so that if I came back to the later date prior to printing it, I can always change this dodge burn layer. I can come back in, I can, let's say I want to darken the sky down even more, I can come back in and just do that. I can make any amount of modifications, and each time I'm doing so, I'm not actually affecting the pixels within the image.